thing we want to talk about, honestly. But this kind of came about after the interview with Sheriff David Hathaway and his demeanor and his grasp of constitutional law, what things are constitutional, what things aren't constitutional. And Jesse felt like this was a good topic to just kind of discuss on how law enforcement should actually act when states do what they did during this whole COVID madness, the lockdowns, the shutdown, the mask mandates, and how Sheriff Hathaway said, yeah, you made a mandate, but I'm not enforcing it. And we need more law enforcement to understand that if a law is unconstitutional, they don't have to enforce it, especially a sheriff, being as they are the highest ranking law enforcement officers in the nation. So, Jesse, good to talk to you again, sir.
Yeah, good to be on again. Always a joy to be on with you.
Yeah, I enjoy our talks too. I mean, let's face it. We start on one topic and somehow we wind up somewhere totally different, and it's all good.
Yeah.
But so what do you got on your mind tonight, Jesse?
Um, Honestly, like you said, after your interview with the sheriff from Arizona, I absolutely loved that interview. It was a phenomenal discussion. He knows his stuff. I love how he was even able to reference some of what our founding fathers had said in the past. That's something that a lot of people have not studied on nearly as much as they should. Um, and he is, from what I saw out of your interview with him, the prime example of what a sheriff should be. Somebody who will stand for the rights and liberties of the people while still also protecting the people from uh, obvious crime and from government tyranny. Um, he is basically the example I'm wanting to make out of all police in what I want police across the United States to look like. Um, I'm sure you know Shane Hazel out of Georgia. Ran for U.S. House 4 years ago, ran for U.S. Or 2 years ago, and ran for U.S. Senate this last election. Um, he had a friend get pulled over recently by an officer that didn't really have a reason to pull him over, but just wanted to run his plates and make sure that the car wasn't stolen. No real reasonable suspicion for it. And Shane Hazel, being a real liberty minded person, understands the Constitution. He realizes that that's a BS pullover. Uh, there's no reasonable suspicion, no crime was committed for a lawful pullover. So he calls the police department and talks with a corporal, I think he said it was. And the corporal had mentioned how he reviewed the traffic stop, the footage of it, and said, "Oh, the officer did nothing wrong. He was perfectly within his right." No, no, he was not. I mean, the officer violated a person's right to freely travel with no reasonable suspicion, no just cause for a stop, and so Shane then calls the mayor, and the mayor directs him towards the deputy chief. And the deputy
Mm.
chief, same story. He goes to the same spiel of how, oh, that officer was fully within his rights. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to tell you to make you feel better, and yada yada. Um, so Shane asks, because the chief deputy says it's within our policy to be able to do that. So Shane asks, is it within your power to change that policy? And he kind of tries to avoid the answer, but eventually he says, yeah. Shane asks again at one point, is it within your power to change that policy? Would you be willing to change that policy? And he tries to divert his answer again. And Shane's like, I asked you a question. I want an answer to the question. And that deputy chief responds with, I'm not going to be talked to like that, and basically ends the call. Yeah.
Oh, so
And
so he
it's you see leadership within police that are totally corrupt. They won't answer questions. They don't want to be held accountable. They don't want to be criticized. And if you dare criticize them, they'll just hang up on you. They're above you. Um, and I see that it is a huge problem plaguing our police force across the United States. And I'm not saying that all of our police are bad. And just like you, when you said you had him on, the sheriff on, you're like, it's probably a little odd, not that I'm against police, but probably a little odd that I'm having a sheriff on. And I have that same stance as you on that. I'm not against the police or anything of that nature. But I want to see accountability. I want to see the police, like that deputy chief that just hung up on Shane, to be removed from office because they are corrupt an entire police branch. I saw a video by a YouTuber called Audit the Audit. And in this video, there was a sheriff that was a corrupt sheriff. City police were surrounding a house trying to get some guy to come out of his house. And the sheriff, off duty, comes up and says, pull your guys out, I'll get him out. And the police officer on scene calls his chief of police, or her chief of police, I mean, and says, the sheriff is down here trying to tell us to back off and that he'll get him out. And I'm not wanting to do that, especially since he's off duty and I think I smell alcohol on his breath. So the sheriff says he has the guy in question on the phone right now, on his cell phone. And the chief of police tells the officer, stay there, don't back off, don't listen to the sheriff. And they eventually got the guy out of the home. Usually I would side with the sheriff because the sheriff has the ultimate jurisdiction in their region. But the part in question was the fact that he seemed to be intoxicated, that he was communicating with the guy personally, and that he was off duty telling the other officers to back off. And so there was actually a court order for a warrant to seize the sheriff's phones to get the communication with the suspect, because it was evidence for whatever reason they were after the suspect. I'm not even sure what the reason was. That was never alluded to in the video. But there was this court order to seize his phones. So the city police show up at the sheriff's office to issue the warrant for the sheriff's phones. And the sheriff pulled his two phones out of his pocket and handed it to his deputy sheriff, the one just below him, and said, hold on to these for me, right after he got the warrants. That's illegal. He just violated law to hand evidence over to somebody else to try and prevent that evidence from being seized. And so it turns into a little bit of an argument with the other officers, because the sheriff's like, I can't believe that this lower court issued a warrant. He thought it should have been some higher court that issued the warrant. And that sheriff also ended up refusing to basically give up the phones until after he contacted an attorney. Doesn't work that way. A warrant has been issued. You're liable and required to hand it over if it is on you. And if it is on you at the time of being informed of that warrant, you have to give whatever item is in question over. You can't hand it to somebody else and say, oh, well, they have it. And the sheriff's deputies under him were backing him up over a court order. So the chief of police for that city came in even, and he's like, listen, all we need is your phones for evidence with regards to the man in question, the suspect in question, because you had communication with this individual while we were investigating them. And you interfered in the investigation, telling us to back off so that you could get him out. We want the phones to know what was said. Eventually, they get the two phones off of him because they basically told the sheriff, we will shut your facility down. We will lock your doors on you if you don't cooperate with this warrant. So eventually he handed over the phones, and it turned out they weren't even the phones that they were doing the warrant for. So he handed over two other phones that didn't have the information on it that they wanted. And like I said, the deputies under the sheriff all showed loyalty to the sheriff before they showed loyalty to the law. And they backed up the sheriff and were ready to basically kick all the city police out that were serving a legal warrant for a seizure of phones. And eventually, this sheriff caused further incident after refusing to give the correct phones over and giving fake phones over, which is tampering with evidence and falsifying evidence and everything else that you could think of on those lines. Eventually, that sheriff got placed under arrest and taken away on another day. And it just goes to show how one bad apple can literally corrupt the entire bunch. As that phrase says, people will say it's just a few bad apples. But if you let those bad apples sit, they'll corrupt the whole bunch. We need to have officers and sheriffs like the one you had on earlier this week. I am drawing a blank on his name at the moment.
Sheriff David Hathaway.
Yes, Sheriff David Hathaway, or David Sheriff Hathaway, as he said in Robert's interview.
Yeah. had to bring that up, didn't you, brother?
Of course I did. But yeah, Sheriff Hathaway is such a prime example of what we need, because we've had so many instances of police that either do not know the law or do not know people's rights or don't even care about people's rights and will enforce a law that just totally violates the rights of others. And I don't completely fault the officers for that, because I do understand they're trying to just do their job, but they need to also be taught and learn what the limitations of their job are. And that's something that I have always been trying to push for and have had arguments with so many people over, with the fact that I'm not one of those people that are saying, oh, we got to get rid of police. I'm not one of those people that try to paint all police as bad. I understand that probably 95% of officers join the force with the intent of doing good. That's pretty much unquestionable. Almost all officers join with the intent of doing good. But because of them, the order following mentality, they're doing what they're being told to do, and there's been officers that have spoken out saying we need to be better than that, and they get fired because they're not following orders. And it's going to become a scenario where, because police chiefs like the one that I mentioned before and sheriffs like the other one that I mentioned before, they won't hold their officers accountable, we're going to run out of good officers. We're going to run out of good officers faster than we run out of bad officers. And we've already been seeing in New York officers leaving the force because of too much criticism for the wrong reasons. And we're going to have a shortage of officers because of that. We have to have accountability now, or we're going to run into a crisis with police. We're going to have a scenario where if we don't get this accountability and we don't promote officers like Sheriff Hathaway, that I see violence picking up even more so than what we're already seeing. I'm thinking we're going to see officers start getting targeted by people that are disgruntled with the police. That's not something I want. I'm trying to avoid that. And when officers start getting targeted because of disgruntled people through constant violations of their rights, constant violations of their liberties, constantly being deemed guilty before innocent, it's going to be very problematic in the future for our law enforcement, and we're going to have good officers getting shot at that shouldn't be shot at. And like many people have been saying, and they're saying it for the wrong reasons, but it's a good thing to say, what happens when there's no more good officers? What happens when all of the good officers walk? What happens when all the good officers realize that it's not worth the trouble? We have to hold the bad officers accountable so that we can reinforce the good officers and promote the good officers. And there was another video that I saw. A I'll just say Officer A and Officer B because there's two officers involved in this one. Officer A pulls over an off-duty officer. Obviously does not realize he's an off-duty officer. Pulls over an off-duty officer who is in an unmarked police vehicle, and says that he was speeding. The Officer B, who was in the unmarked police vehicle, turned on his lights as soon as the stop was initiated to show that he was an officer. And when the Officer A comes up to his window, he's like, "Really? Really? You're gonna pull me over? Really?" Just being a jackass to Officer A. And Officer B actually turned out to be a superior of Officer A. So he's being a jackass to his own officer. And the Officer A, who initiated the stop, basically is like, "You know what? You recognize that you were speeding. I'll use my discretion and not write you the ticket." And Officer B, the one that was pulled over, just snappy, "Just write me the damn ticket. Just write the ticket." Just, again, berating Officer A just for pulling him over for speeding. And Officer A alleges that Officer B was going 90 miles per hour on the highway. Officer B says, "BS, I've never gone that fast, even in this cruiser, even on duty," and just goes off. I don't know what the speed was. There's no evidence of that, but just the alleged speed of 90 miles per hour. And the officer eventually walks away, lets him go, doesn't issue the speeding ticket, and Officer B, the off-duty officer, about 15 minutes later, pulls over the on-duty officer for failing to signal taking a left turn or something like that. So you realize you didn't take a turn your signal on when you made a turn back there, right? And just goes after him, just keeps harassing this officer with a retaliatory stop. And again, he doesn't issue anything, but he just starts making a scene about how he was stopped. And this eventually leads to an investigation on the superior officer who was being a jackass to another officer. And ultimately, when I heard that this investigation was going on, I was like, yes, great. A corrupt officer, an asshole officer, is going to get held accountable. And as I continue watching, it turns out that Officer B, the one that was pulled over, the one that was being a jackass, got away with it. And he has a history of being a jackass, and he got away with it. And the reason he got away with it was because Officer A didn't issue the fine, because it wasn't hard evidence anymore. It was just he said, she said, instead of hard evidence, because no fine was issued to have misconduct listed. All of this is on video. If Officer B, a superior officer, will harass his own officers, what has he done to the everyday person? That's what I want to know. If he'll treat his own officers like that, what is he doing to the everyday people?
You know, we're discussing all this, and to me, the problem really is that it's a tenfold issue.
It is
because right now we have people wanting to defund the police. We have district attorneys like what's her first? I can't remember her first name, but Gardner here in St. Louis during some of the riots and Antifa and BLM, who refused to, charge anyone. She just let them all go. You have issues like where you're talking in the first instance, and then you have other issues where there's literally a pissing match between different departments on who's got the authority to do what. Now we used to have in a neighboring town close to me, they did have a chief of police that when he got a new officer in, he would hand them a constitution and say, study this, learn it, because you have to follow this when when you are charging someone, pulling someone over, whatever, interviewing someone, whatever. He went to the extent one time where I think I don't know if it was the uh some kind of narcotics agents or something showed up in his town to bust this guy, and he's like, there were two or three black Suburbans, and it was they were trying to all these officers were trying to go in his mobile home, and he shows up and he said, "You guys need to leave because all you're going to do is incite violence. You got this many guys for one dude, and you're going to all try to cram in this mobile home. Like, what are you doing?" So um, he ends up telling one of the other on-duty officers, he's like, "I want you to call every reserve over here, what have you. We're clearing these guys out." Well, eventually he did clear them out. He walked inside, talked to the guy, arrested him because there was a warrant out, arrested him and handed him over. But his thing was, why are you bringing 20 guys to bust one person? You
Yeah.
you know the one of the other major issues that we have is that the federal government charged or not charged sold military style equipment to or police departments nationwide very on the cheap. And so in fact Owensville here, they were contacted about buying different military style vehicles, and the second well it's the city marshal, and I guess his highest ranking officer who I talked to a lot said, the chief asked me, do we want to buy any of these? And he's like, no, we don't want to buy. We have no need for this. When I worked for a local pest control company, we would do parades in a neighboring county in one of the towns, and it was the Franklin County Sheriff's Department had like two or three of these big Humvees, but it also had Department of Homeland Security stickers on it. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I don't want to see out of a county sheriff's department is military style looking vehicles with Department of Homeland Security stickers on them.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Yeah.
So we have all these things, and the problem is uh, we've created a society and a system where people that have committed a crime and are guilty of things, the media is holding them up as they weren't really that bad, and and then you have people who don't necessarily the victimless crimes. You're more likely to me anymore. You're more likely to get arrested and thrown in jail for a victimless crime over a crime that involves a victim, depending on, and I know this sounds racist, but this is the way the media and our government is acting
Yep.
because of skin color. And I think we have a federal government that would love to see your local police departments go away because that gives them the reason to establish federal police in every state.
Yeah.
Then
That
then you
wouldn't be
have
surprised by that.
the federal government enforcing the laws. Not only that, but they're going to create just about every law imaginable to make it easier to arrest and find someone. Look at all the private, you want to talk about another issue with police departments. There was a movie called was it The Great White Hope or something? It was about marijuana and stuff like that. And they showed down in Texas that there was this private prison. It was owned by a private company. But when they built this prison, they just went through in order to fill the beds. They were just arresting everybody they could, trumping up charges. And because we've allowed, places have allowed these private prison systems, which they're such big companies, their stocks are actually traded in the stock market. That's how big of a company they are. Building these private prisons and then enticing local law enforcement to arrest more people to fill the beds because then they get taxpayer money on top of it. So there's so many parts of this equation as far as law enforcement goes. And these officers probably 90% plus are there to protect and serve, can't protect and serve because now they're just getting bombarded by all sides. You have some people who just hate the police in general because they're police. Then you get, like you said, you get the bad apples in there, and they're not removed from their job. They're allowed to stay on. You got people wanting to defund them, and you've got the racism argument put inside there in this argument, and now they're afraid to do certain things because they'll be called racist, lose their job. And you have the Kim Gardners of the world who just won't charge anybody with a crime when it's politically expedient for her, so she can make a name for herself and try to climb the political ladder. Honestly, I don't know that I would want to be a police officer anymore or sheriff's deputy or whatever because there are situations where to the public there's no right answer, and their judgment call is laid at the feet of the public, which it should be. Your police department should be transparent, but it gets to a point where if the media climbs on board and just starts bombarding people with certain images, cutting clips apart and changing the narrative, the guy that did the right thing now has done the wrong thing in the public eye, and he can't, they just begin to feel like there's no right answer. Also, and I've had people from the military and other things tell me this as well. So it's not just a guy from the outside who's never served in law enforcement or in the military. This isn't just my opinion, but they said we've put first responders in the hero platform. So when you do that, when all these people are just heroes, you give some the mentality that whatever they do is right. They can't do anything wrong because they're a hero. We've given them automatic hero status, and we've done this hero worship. And to me, it's one of those things where you appreciate the good officers and you show appreciation and you uplift them.
Yep.
But you don't automatically put them in hero status because when Clinton was in office and he put more, his thing was, well, I'm going to put more police on the streets. Apparently, they couldn't have an IQ higher than a certain number. Okay. Well, that causes problems because then you could get a boatload of officers who will not question orders, who will not question anything they're told. They will just follow orders.
Yep.
And it's just this multi-tiered system with a problem at each level. And then the guys that literally are just trying to protect and serve, it's making their jobs nigh impossible to do.
Yep.
And so there is, people want to make an easy answer out of all this, and there is no easy answer. Now, the issue with a bad apple in the department, these officers need to be trained that says, hey, if you know a guy isn't following the Constitution and you know he's infringing on the rights of someone just so he can make an arrest, we have to get into this system, and in the training that you are to turn them in. You are to do the right thing because you are not there. You're not some just taxpayer funded, do whatever you want hero. You work for the people of your area, not against them, and you're not above them. You're not sitting on another level above them, hovering above the crowd, dictating mandates. You are to serve the public.
Yep.
So the training, we go back to, there's been talks of how to train police. They need some different training, but to me, that's one of the things they need to delve into is how do we train officers so instead of this thin blue line and no one tells on another officer, that we have to bring about change where you uplift the good officers. And if someone is doing awful things constantly, they are removed from their job post haste. You get outside people, non-biased organizations to do, the investigation on the officer, not an in-house investigation. You go out of house if you have to. Unbiased, let's look at the facts. Did he or did he not do wrong?
Yep.
And sure, that might be, that might be a burden on the, you might be, taxpayers are probably going to have to fund that for a while. But I think as if maybe we change that to where it's instead of an in-house investigation, it's out of house. Police officers who are bad, who may constantly break the rules, are going to learn that, ooh, boy, if it's not my own department investigating, it's an outside unbiased source, I might not get away with this stuff. Maybe we change how things are investigated so they don't feel like they're probably going to get a free pass because their own in-house department is going to investigate, the situation, and somebody else is going to come in and take a peek and say, clearly from this footage and all the evidence we have, you clearly were in the wrong.
Yeah.
And in here in Missouri with the Second Amendment Preservation Act, which it seems like it finally went through, it's going to hit the governor's desk, and if that gets signed into law, there's a way. So if you have an officer who's, you know, enforcing unconstitutional gun laws, they not only can they lose their job, they can be sued in court
Yep.
for damages. So it's not just, well, if you lose your job, they could literally be sued in civil court, and then if they lose their job, no longer can they be a law enforcement official in the state of Missouri. And maybe, just maybe, some of these other rules need to apply, not just with the Second Amendment, which is a great start, but in other areas, some of the other amendments might get trampled on. And okay, if you're going to do that, if you're going to violate constitutional law, then if you can be sued for damages. And if you lose your law enforcement, you lose your job as in law enforcement, you can't be law enforcement in the state of Missouri anymore. Maybe that's something that states need to look at. And also, again, like with the Kim Gardners of the world, we have got to teach the voters. The voters have to educate themselves on proper conduct of the city attorney generals because what they're doing is they're voting someone into office and she's clearly not upholding the law. I don't know why you would have we have these people who say cops are racist, yada yada yada. They're not they're not following the law, they're breaking the law. And then you vote and elect someone into office who clearly does not care about enforcing the law. So the question is are the communities saying excuse me, are the communities saying that they would rather have lawless society, or do they want to be do they want law enforcement to enforce by rule of law and constitutional law, or do they want a lawless society? And it seems like some of the more major metropolitan areas, because of the slow drip of socialism and communism, are drifting towards lawlessness. They'd rather have lawlessness and possible chaos than an institution that serves the public and serves it well. But because society has been divided so radically into two sections, those who defend police no matter what and those who hate it, those of us in the middle say we don't have a problem with the police departments who do their job and do it well. We have a problem with the bad apples who enforce unconstitutional acts, or they themselves intrude on people's rights. Those of us in the middle who just say, can't we just have law enforcement that follows the Constitution? Our voices are being drowned out by the two sides, the two radical parts of this argument. And again, there's so many issues here that cause the police to, a lot of times they can't even do their job, or they're afraid to do their job.
Yep.
So again, there you lose good officers because I'm like, they're saying, if this is what I have to put up with, there's no point. I'm gonna have to get into another career because clearly I can't do my job. You're left with people who don't care, or you're left with the bad apples. And now you're going to have bad law enforcement in your area. So to me, the public, instead of crying out for just defund them or just, just follow along blindly, we have to get the public to understand that there still is a constitution, whether the media tells you there is or isn't. We have a constitution, and if you just get the officers in, thorough background checks, so on and so forth, get those officers in who understand your rights and don't trample all over them, that you will see that the public in your area and the police department actually can work hand in hand together very well. And not only will you have less crime, but the people are going to be happier. The officers are going to be happier because everyone can go about their business. And if they're not doing anything wrong, they don't have anything to worry about. They don't have to worry about getting pulled over just to check the plates to make sure the car's not stolen. They won't have any of these things because there are have been too many people who just have said, well, if that helps crack down on crime, then okay. But yeah, until it's you that gets pulled over
Yep.
and you that sits on the side of the road in embarrassment as a cop's running your plates, you weren't speeding, you used your signal, you were wearing your seatbelt, and the other 10 million laws that you followed. Now you have to sit here and wonder, am I just going to get pulled over for no freaking reason? I mean, we have to get to a point where we come to agreement that says, why are we doing all these things? The laws shouldn't be that complicated.
You
If
know,
you just follow the Constitution, it shouldn't be that complicated.
that's actually something to touch on, and I really like how you listed it as a 10, basically a tenfold problem. But a really important thing to touch on with what you said is if we just had constitutional law enforcement, it would be such an easy job for our police officers to uphold the law because they wouldn't have 10,000 different versions of the same law to enforce. If you just had constitutional law in place and that they literally just responded to incidences or were out to be able to respond quickly, and if they happen to see something take place that is against the law, then they respond to it. But that proactive looking for something, even with no evidence or no reasonable suspicion and all of that, that makes their job harder. It makes the lives of the people more difficult. It makes it so that you risk being criminalized for something that you didn't do or something that really shouldn't be a crime anyway, because as you mentioned, victimless crimes that get enforced. Um, like if you get pulled over for no reason at all and you think, was I speeding? If you ask if you were speeding, that shows that's one of those scenarios of anything you say can and will be used against you. So if you ask if you were speeding, even if you were not speeding, that's evidence against you that maybe you were, and you just criminalized yourself on accident. Even if speeding is minor, but it's just an example. Is if they pull you over for no reason and you ask, "Was I speeding?" That's something that could be used against you in court because that's the plausibility that you were. And it takes away any defense of, oh, there was absolutely no way that I was speeding. So if you were not speeding, the officer says, yes, you were, after you ask that, you're guilty because you have no plausible deniability anymore when you had no idea whether you were or not. And that's how our system has totally fallen away from like it's the way it should be. Is you have officers that will literally look for reasons to fine or arrest rather than just let people live their lives if they're not hurting or endangering anyone. Um, there was a example in another court case actually that I was looking at where an individual was talking to two of their attorneys, and while in the courthouse, they handed their phones to the attorneys because the attorneys were going to use them in defense. And as they came out of the courthouse, they got stopped by a police officer that had a warrant to seize any electronic devices that were on that person. But that person no longer had them in their possession. They were in the possession of their attorneys. And this is actually a good comparison to that sheriff scenario that I mentioned before, where they had the warrant for the sheriff's phones. They were on that sheriff's person, and then he handed them to his deputy after being served the warrant. This individual in the court system had actually handed the phones to the attorneys before being issued the warrant, and the warrant, as the attorney read the warrant, said, "These are only to be seized from the person in question. They are not in that person's possession." And the officer made the argument, "Well, we literally saw that person hand their phone to you while you were in the courthouse." Yeah, before the warrant was issued. Eventually, this officer arrested both of those attorneys for obstruction of justice, which they were not doing. They were upholding the law. Um, and I heard that both of those attorneys took the police to court on that issue. I don't know the outcome of it. I just know that they took them to court. I would imagine the outcome would be very much in their favor because they were released almost immediately afterwards when they realized that they screwed up. but but yeah, I mean, there's just so many examples of police not knowing the Constitution, not knowing the law, not knowing how to do their job properly. And it's sad because the police are a necessity. They are a true necessity in society. Because if you didn't have them, and like you said, if we had lawlessness, look at what happened in Seattle and Portland when they annexed territory and had no law. There was
that worked out real well.
Yeah. It's pretty obvious that the police are an essential to our society. And on the topic of how it's a tenfold issue, you're spot on, because we need to promote the good apples. We need to praise the good apples. We need to make examples out of those good apples to lead with, to get more. And I think the simplest way to get everything done is to try and get sheriffs like David Hathaway that will stand on the Constitution and stand on people's rights, because I guarantee you all of the deputies under Sheriff Hathaway have a much easier job than they ever did before him, and they have a much easier job than any city police in his district that do not have a constitutional chief of police. Because if they don't have a constitutional chief of police, they're being asked to go out and harass citizens for victimless crimes. While David Hathaway is standing there being like, "Nope, don't enforce that. There's no reason to enforce the mask mandate. There's no reason to enforce shutting down businesses. There's no reason to respond to any of this nonsense." And look at how many people simply trying to do like an open carry demonstration just to show their right to bear arms and to educate people, and they get stopped and harassed by police, being demanded to identify themselves and treated like they're a criminal before they've even done anything. You occasionally get an officer that comes up. There was one out of Texas. Amazing. I love this guy. There was a video of a guy open carrying in Texas. Officer pulls up and says, "Hey, I know what you're doing. You're just open carrying. You're expressing your rights. I'm not going to make a scene. I'm not going to ask you for any identification or anything. I already know what you're doing. Good on you. I support it 100%, but we got a call on our emergency number. We have to respond. We have to make contact. And I'm just doing this to make that contact. If you want to give your name, great. If not, so be it. I made contact with an individual carrying a gun. He wasn't doing anything wrong. I let him go." That's what you should be doing in a response like that, because there's nothing suspicious about it. He even said that they've gotten like so many calls about it that the people making the operators, they're basically saying, "Stop calling about this. They're not breaking any laws." I mean, it's you've got that fear of guns that goes into it because society has gotten so scared of an inanimate object. But
well, let me interject there real quick, because you have the opposite. I don't remember the name of the outfit. I think it was called Cop Block or something like that.
yes,
In Washington, Missouri, which is that's about 40 minutes away from me. There was a gentleman Now he did it on purpose, and he makes legal owners look stupid.
Yes, there are a
But
lot that do that.
he had a gun and he was carrying it around, and but he was just walking back and forth in the parking lot, looking at people. Then a cop shows up, and he tries to say, "What? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just carrying my gun out in public. I'm carrying open carrying." And the cop goes, "Dude, you're doing it in the wrong way. You're sitting here holding a gun in your hand, walking back and forth, looking into store windows. You can't do that." And the guy, because he just thought that all cops sucked, he was making a scene, and the cop's like, "You can't. That's not proper, gun control.
Yep.
That's not how people who are pro gun act. You can't just do that. You people thought you literally had ill intent the way you looked. Normal people, if they're carrying openly, don't sit there and wander back and forth in a parking lot. And the problem
Pacing
is
around like he's debating whether or not he's going to go through with whatever
yeah,
he's doing. Yeah.
and so the media latches on to these useful idiots because they hate the police and they just want to make a scene out of everything. They're
And it just further divides everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then the media grabs a hold of that and says, "Oh, look at this weird ass gun owner out here just wandering back and forth in the parking lot because it's okay to openly carry firearms." It's like, well, okay, yeah, he's an idiot. We won't deny that. The problem is 99.9% of us who are law-abiding citizens and legal gun owners won't do that. Have to no normally 80% of the time we're going to conceal. You don't even know we have the gun, and we're not going to sit there and fiddle with it all the time to make you nervous. We might print, but we're not going to make an attempt to see for you to see that we're printing inside our shirt with whatever firearm we're carrying. And it's just like uh, God, why do these again, it's America, we're free. It's just sad that those individuals make it so much harder for us to lawfully carry a weapon because you have these tools out there
Yep.
that just have to make a scene out of everything. And since we're on the topics of guns, Jesse, have you ever handled a Canic 9mm?
I have not. All I've handled so far is a Springfield.
Okay, do yourself a favor because I just purchased one about a month ago, and I'm telling you, it was the gun. It's a 4-inch barrel, so it's the gun, two mags, hard shell case, Kydex holster, and a mag loader. 379 brand new.
Oh wow,
It's a
that's a
nice
good
gun.
price.
The
That's
only
an
problem
excellent
is
price.
I don't have enough ammo to really go out and put rounds
Nobody
down
has
range.
enough ammo right now except for one person that I know who's been stockpiling for like 5 years.
I should have been. I'm kicking myself in the butt so hard for not doing it this whole time. But anyway, back. I don't want to get off on that too
Yeah,
much, but
I get it.
it's but it is a thing. We have people out there, and they have the right to act stupid. It's just that with society set up the way it is right now, with the media and the power that it has over people, those people need to just learn to, hey, we get it, you don't like police and you're part of cop block and all this, but
Yeah.
you are making the case to not be able to own a gun. So why don't you just act like a normal citizen would instead of sitting there looking threatening and menacing, wandering a parking lot, staring at people? What good is that going to do?
Yeah, and like I've actually considered doing open carrying as an educational thing, not to be like the creepy pacing back and forth like I'm getting ready to do something and just debating on whether or not I should do it. Because I think open carrying is a very good, useful tool to educate people that guns are not inanimate objects, are not dangerous unless the person wielding them is intending to do something bad with them. They're just like a knife. If I pick up a knife right now, I could either just chop vegetables with it or I could stab someone with it. It's all a matter of the intent behind the user.
If you live in the UK, you can go deposit it in a bin
Yes.
if they tell you to.
Yes, that's right. They have that knife buyback program in the UK because when they banned guns, well, knives became the main tool to yeah. So that's another topic too.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, like on the topic of open carrying, that guy in Texas that I mentioned, the officer that responded, A+, excellent officer, needs to be promoted. Because him coming down, being like, "Yep, I'm just coming down to make contact," just because it was a emergency number call. I by law have to make contact. If I can find you, I found you. I made contact. I know what you're doing. I can see you mean no harm. Done deal. Um, and then, like you said, there's the incident with the idiots with cop block that are just trying to cause a scene. Um, and I will say that I don't think it's idiotic to like not give your name to police if you have no legal requirement to do it. Because there's many instances where a police will stop you and try and identify you with no reasonable suspicion of a crime, and very few states actually require you to identify just because an officer asked you to. Generally, it's if you are being detained or under arrest, then you have to identify yourself. But when they're just doing a voluntary stop and investigate, everything's optional. It's when it becomes involuntary that it's no longer optional. And the Supreme Court has ruled that unless the way to determine whether or not you are detained, whether an officer says so or not, is whether or not any reasonable person feels as though they are free to leave or end the discussion at any point. If you are not free to leave or end the discussion at any point, you are being detained. And in a lot of these videos, I see officers say, "No, you're not being detained, but you have to answer my question." Then you are being detained, according to what the Supreme Court says. Because if they're saying you cannot leave and you cannot end the discussion, you're under detainment. And there's a guy down in Florida who does open carrying all the time in his videos, and he'll do open carrying while fishing, just as a educational thing. And he gets stopped by police all the time, even though California has an open carry law that you can open carry so long as you're fishing, hunting, camping, or traveling to and from those events. I don't think that's free enough, but still, he does
Right.
that as a sample to get people understanding. Hey, I have a right to carry. There's nothing wrong with open carrying. He'll have the rifle strapped to his back, and he'll have a fishing pole, and he'll go fishing. And he gets stopped all the time. And one of the encounters, he actually had probably a dozen officers pull guns on him. And he had them call the Fish and Wildlife guy down because they were just totally ignorant of the law, and he could even quote them the specific law, and they wouldn't research the law. So he said, "Call down the Fish and Wildlife guy, since all of you are too stupid to know what this law is or too stupid to look it up." And he wasn't going to identify himself because he had no reason to. He didn't commit a crime. He wasn't doing anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Fish and Wildlife guy eventually shows up and says, "Yeah, you're free to go." And all those officers had to just feel stupid, I would think. Because when the Fish and Wildlife guy came down, he was like, "Yep, you're free to go." And there was one other time that he got stopped that an officer immediately pulls a gun on him without hesitation. And this officer just saw him. He wasn't even called to him. This officer just saw him walking back to his car, holding his fishing pole and with the rifle stuck to his back. Pulls a gun on him, tells him to drop the rifle and drop this, and drop that, and everything. But when the officer first encounters him, he's like, "What's that?" And I don't know if the guy was being a smartass or what. He's like, "Fishing pole," because he's holding his fishing pole. And the officer's like, "No, the other thing, my AR pistol." He's like, "Why are you open carrying that?" He's like, "Because I can." He's like, "No, you can't. That's illegal." It's like, "No, it's not, because you can open carry when you're fishing or going to or from fishing." It's like, "I don't see any fish. I'm coming back because I didn't catch any fish. I have a fishing pole. I was fishing." So backup shows up, and they end up taking his gun and this, that, and the other. Eventually, they all go away when the chief of police or whatever superior shows up and finally says, "You know what? Let him go." Um, and and the guy, because these officers were just so like after him, he was like, "Can you guys leave before I pick up my gun? Can you set my gun over there so that you don't shoot me when I pick my gun up?" Because they were literally
Oh.
that like, because like I said, the first responding officer literally pulled his gun on him when he first pulled up, and it's like, really? He's walking back from fishing with the gun strapped to his back. Like, it's not going to be easy to pull the gun down, pull it up, and then point it at the officer. The officer just, you have way quicker time to respond with the gun at the hip than pulling the gun off of your, strapped on your back. Then yeah, so just ridiculous. And the guy's like, "You know what? Can you set my guns over there? I'll pick them up after you guys leave because I don't want you guys thinking anything stupid just because I'm picking up my gun." And eventually they all disperse. But um, and when the audit guy goes over the history of this encounter, the guy followed up with a complaint for good reason because he was harassed for no reason, and the original officer that stopped him falsified the police report. Because the guy that stopped him said, "I didn't see a fishing pole." The very first thing that the guy that he was responding to said when he asked, "What's that?" My fishing pole." No, the other thing. Clearly, he saw the fishing pole. And in the video, one of the other officers is holding the fishing pole that nobody saw while they're questioning him. "What fishing pole?" As another officer's holding it. "Yeah, I didn't see a fishing pole." And there's an ex-officer out of Ohio, I think. I'm gonna look this up. I can't remember his name. He is an ex-police officer who keeps the best data in the world on police conduct, especially in the United States. His name is Philip M. Stinson. He was a criminologist at Bowling Green State University, and he has a study that showed that out of about 10,000 cases that he had observed, officers falsified police reports 6.3% of the time. That's 630 falsified police reports that led to arrests. And part of this comes down from I don't remember what they call it, but there's a psychological thing where there's been multiple studies shown that through chain of command and through communication and through dialogue, the original story gets diluted. So if I tell you that a red car sped down the street, you tell somebody else a green car sped down the street, and they tell somebody it was a green truck, and it just dilutes the truth of the story. There's scenarios like that take place, that the longer the case is thought upon, the more information that's forgot, or the more information that's lost, or the more people that the information's been passed through, the more diluted it gets. And I don't know if it's something that he forgot, and it's something that's alluded to in this guy's study, how there's multiple reasons the falsified reports get done. It could be miscommunication, could be ill intent, could be multitude of reasons. Could be grudges, could be I didn't like the guy, so I wanted to take him in. Like, if somebody doesn't cooperate with unlawful orders, there's oftentimes a police officer will unlawfully arrest the guy for interfering in an investigation or interfering in justice or whatever scenario they want to play. But that's also been very defined in most states as to what interfering with the duties of a police officer or obstructing justice or whatnot. Those are very well defined in most states, saying that it has to be the intent of disrupting police activities with force or threat of force or violence or anything of that nature. If you're just refusing to give information or refusing to be a witness, that's not obstruction of justice. And a lot of times officers will call that obstruction of justice, and it's something that really needs to be stopped because there's people that get arrested for obstruction of justice that really shouldn't be. There's another video I saw that was very, very disappointing on all accounts. The guy in question, he's an ass. I mean, but so is the officer. So an officer sitting at a stop sign, and he sees this man, his wife walking down the street, and
Right.
he waves at them. He just simply waves at them, and the guy, being an ass, flips off the officer. But again, perfectly within his right, whether or not he's a disrespectful ass or not, he's perfectly within his right. And again, the Supreme Court and many court cases have ruled that a person has a right to criticize an officer however they feel necessary, with whatever expletives they want to use, with whatever. And the officer has to have thick skin. The officer cannot take
Yeah.
offense to it. The officer cannot retaliate just because somebody expressed their right to criticize a public servant.
Yeah, until you spit on them, which is considered assault.
Yes.
Words, sticks and stones, man. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. And so the officer actually stops him. And he's like, "What's your issue? Why do you got to flip me off? What do you hate about me? What do you hate about police? I just waved at you." The officer creates this scene. And he tries to identify the guy. He tries to make him give his ID and this, that, and the other. And the guy's like, "No, I don't have to give you any of that. All I did was flip you off. And from what I'm seeing, I had good reason to do it, basically." And so this officer ends up saying, "No, you're being." This officer ends up saying, "Yeah, just keep walking. You go that way." And the guy that flipped him off stops dead in his tracks. He's like, "Excuse me?" Basically, you're telling me I have to go do this now? And he just pisses off the guy that he stopped. Again, with good reason, because this officer's being an ass. And it escalates from there. They get in a shouting match, and the officer detains and arrests the guy. And when backup shows up, he goes over to his wife. He's like, "Well, what's his problem? All I wanted to do was know his name. All I did was wave." She's like, "Yeah, I don't know, blah, 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 whatever." He guilt trips the wife into saying what his name was, and then they release him. No charge, no nothing. They just release him on spot. They don't take him to jail or anything.
To be used against him later.
Yeah. I mean, it was literally just a power trip. That's all it was. And from what I can tell, the guy in the video said that he was going to have a lawsuit, but there was no information as to whether he actually pursued that or not. And I hope he did, because everything about that was ridiculous. And courts have routinely held that a person has the right to express their opinion however they want to do it, so long as they're not threatening or harming.
Yeah, it's just like when people would flash their brights to say, "Hey, there's a cop, up the road there," and
Yeah.
blah blah blah. There's a speed trap, and there have been people that have been pulled over and given tickets, and then gets to court, and the court's like, "That's freedom of speech. You can't stop someone from flashing their lights at someone else to warn them there's a cop up the road. That's you're intruding on their First Amendment rights," and it gets thrown out, which I know ticks them off. But look at it this way: if you flash your lights and the people slow down,
that's a positive.
What's the problem? They slowed down.
Yeah.
It's because you took away their ability to gain funds for the state away from them, or the city or the county.
Yep.
That they're angry now because you took away some of their funding.
Yep.
And it's like they slow down.
Yeah,
What's the problem?
there was another one out here. My mom used to tell me how where she grew up, they would use like a bull symbol that they would wave. They'd stick their hand
Oh,
out the window for a bull symbol. That hey, there's a bull up ahead, a police ready to pull you over.
nice.
Um, and that was one of the ways of flashing because sometimes people wouldn't know what the flashing's for. They
Oh
might
my
think
God.
it's, oh, you bumped a button or whatever, right? Whatever. There's people that don't know that. But the bull symbol was actually a very understood symbol in the area. Like, there's cop ahead. There's a speed trap ahead.
Huh.
Um, and that way there was no flashing lights or anything like that. But still, they didn't like it for the same reason. They definitely did not
Well,
like it for the same reason. But it was just another way to basically sign speed trap ahead.
I think I know a perfect way to get out of that too. If you like throw up the horns and they're like, "Oh, we saw you throwing up the horns and waving," warning people, be like, "Listen, bro, I'm listening to Ronnie James Dio. He invented the horns. He's the guy that brought horns to metal, and I was just letting everybody else know that I'm rocking out to some Ronnie James Dio right now. So you, sir, are completely wrong. Let me rock out. Let me rock out to some Dio, and you can go sit back over there and try to pull people over for speeding. I am just trying to rock out on my way home from work, and I'm not trying to impede your job at all. I'm just being extra metal right now, so you calm down, sir."
Right.
I will tell you this too, real quick. Years ago, my wife had a gal that worked for her, and she was at a different store, and on the way home, her car broke down, and my wife's like, "Hey, can you go pick her husband up? He's over at XYZ place and take him over there." So, I was like, that's cool. So I go up this street and I see a cop sitting at this intersection. He's got his lights off. I'm like, and I see it's highway patrol. I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. So I make a left turn, didn't use my signal. And as soon as I make the turn and pull over to this house, boom, he's on me. And the first thing he does is I have one hand on my steering wheel and one hand on my leg. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? And the first thing he does, he gets up the window. He's like, whoa, let me see your hands. And I'm like, right freaking here. And he's like, any reason you didn't use your turn signal there? I said, nope, no reason. He's like, any reason you didn't you don't have your seatbelt on right now? I was like, nope, no reason. He's like, all right, let me see your ID. So I hand him everything. He runs it. I don't have a single point on my driving record. The only ticket I've had is a seatbelt ticket before, and and not coming to a complete stop, which is nonsense. But anyway, so basically, the guy that I was picking up, apparently, which I had no idea, had a warrant out for his arrest. And what they did is they used me because eventually he walks out like, "Hey, what's going on?" And as soon as he walks up out, they're like, "Hey, blah blah blah, just the guy we want to see." And they motion him over. They end up arresting him. I'm like, "Oh, so you used me to draw him out of the house to arrest him? That's lovely." And the thing is, he's like, "So you live on you live at blah 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 May Lane," and he's like, "Where's that?" And I go, "Right through those trees, right there. There's a street. That's where I live. Right at the end of that street, right there." And he's like, And what's funny is I saw him later. I was in a parade here in town with the Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts, one of the two, and I was sitting on the back, and he was working the intersection. I must have gave him the biggest hate look that I've given. Because normally, if a cop pulls me over, I'm just like, I'm civil. I don't get stupid with them because normally I have done something wrong. And but I just looked at him like, yep, you're a douche canoe because you used me to lure somebody out of a house. And but yeah, he just treated me like he kind of gave me that you're a suspect vibe right now. I'm like, no, I'm not because I haven't broken any laws, don't have any warrants out, don't even have points on my driving record. So yeah, as you can see, I have a very clean record. That's what I'm thinking in my head. And I kicked myself in the butt for not placing my cell phone up on the dash and just recording the conversation to let other people hear it down afterwards to say, well, listen to this guy. And he just he was suspicious of me because I was picking this guy up to take him to his car that had broken down and treat me like, oh, I must have a warrant too. And I'm like, no, I have nothing even close to a warrant.
Right.
The only warrant I have is the warranted feeling that I just want to drop this guy off and go back home because I'd just gotten off work that evening and I was ready to just relax at home. And but yeah, that kind of left a sour taste in my mouth because I'm like, I have never been treated like this at a stop ever. And when I lived in Colorado for a little while, this is another funny one. I lived in Colorado for a little while, and I came back, and I just got Missouri plates back on my car, and I was at the car wash, washing my car, and when I sprayed the license plate, it just took the sticker and knocked it off, and I'm like, oh crap! But I still had one on the front, so I'm driving up Main Street, and the city marshal, who's still the city marshal, like flips flips his lights on. I pull over, and I'm like, what the heck is going on here? And he waves me back to his car. And he goes, do you see something wrong with this picture? And I go, oh, I said, that blasted off in the car wash. I said, if you go around the front, you'll see I have an actual tag for the correct year. And he's like, oh, okay, never mind. I got places to be. Move out of the way. What? Well, excuse me? This dude, okay, I don't know. I don't think he's got many years left, but this guy tells his officers when he hires them. Now, this is the city marshal, so he's top cop in the town. He tells his new guys, "Don't call me after 9 o'clock at night. I'm in bed." And it's like, wait a minute, you're the city marshal. You don't have a time you can be called. What are you
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah, that's
You're the boss man, so you could get a call. But yeah, he literally don't call me after 9 o'clock because I'm in bed, and it's just like, but he gets reelected year after year after at time after time. I'm like, I listen to you all complain about him nonstop, but when it comes to election time, you elect him again. It makes absolute and not again. He doesn't go around violating people's rights, any of that stuff. I I used to spray the police station. There was an incident between I don't remember who it was, but one of them was a city alderman and all this stuff, and he flat out told him, he goes, listen, this is I can't get into this because that would be considered tampering. He's like, you're going to have to go outside to resolve this issue. If I get involved and I pick a side, it's going to turn ugly, and I can't do that by law. So I'm like, well, at least he knows the law. But I'm like, dude, someone can call you. And if there would be some kind of major hostility in town where someone was shooting people, are you going to tell me that you don't want anybody calling you and telling you, hey, we got a mass shooter on our hands?
right.
You're gonna join us for this? That just seemed ridiculous. But it's funny. He was out campaigning one day, and we have friends. My wife has family friends, and he walked up to his door, and he's like, yeah, I'm so and so. I'm running for city marshal again. I hope I get your vote. And he handed him this pamphlet, and the guy just wads it up and throws it down on the ground. And the city marshal extends his hand for him to shake it, and he just turns around, walks in his house, and slams the door in his face. He's telling me this. I'm like, dang. He goes, I don't like that guy because he has a scanner. And he said, I've explicitly heard him before saying, yeah, I'm just going to stay here. You guys go take care of that. And he's like, he's a cop too. He doesn't have the right to just sit there and tell his officers, yeah, you go take care of that. I'm just gonna hang out here. He said, that's not cool. And I'm like, well, I don't have a scanner, so I don't hear all these things, but I know he wasn't pulling my leg and telling me a lie.
Yeah.
It's just not the way he is. But so even, and that's the thing, people, we see the bad things in the cities, but we've had police officers around here that were, I had one pull me over one time, and lied to me straight up and said, we're running a special this month on moving violations, so I have to give you a ticket because I didn't come to a complete stop at a stop sign. So he had to give me a ticket because they were the special of the month was moving violations. I talked to the cops later that I know well, and they said, we don't do that. We've never done it. We don't sit there and pick a different type of violation to focus on that month to try to eliminate a problem. We don't do that. He goes, he wanted to write you a ticket, and so not to be the bad guy, he came up with some lame excuse. And I said, well, I thought it sounded ridiculous, but I don't freaking know. I don't work in your office. I don't know what the city tells you to do. I have no freaking clue at that time. And they're like, that was complete horse crap. And he was there. I don't think he was there a few months and he was gone. And I'm like, yeah, it's probably for the best because God knows how many tickets he wrote under with some lame excuse. And I'm sure people started complaining about, like, asking cops, hey, are you running a special on it? Like, know what he's talking about. And they're like, well, that cop said it.
Right.
I'm sure people started complaining and he ended up leaving. But even small town USA can have their dirty law enforcement. What was the city in Tennessee when the vets came home from World War II? Athens.
Yeah, Athens,
Tennessee. The Battle of Athens.
The entire department was corrupt. Yep.
And the vets came home and had a shootout in the middle of town to get rid of said law enforcement.
Yep,
So
at the local jail. They besieged the local jail where they were stuffing the ballot and rigging an election so that the sheriff and the county leadership would all stay in power, and or city leadership, I think.
Yeah.
And they were stuffing that ballot just to rig that election, and they knew that they had to win that siege within 2 hours, or else the National Guard was going to show up and they would be in trouble. Even though they themselves were military, they knew they would be in trouble if they did not resolve that quickly. But with the explosives and military weapons, they ended up, and there you go, they had to use military weapons to siege the government to get their rights restored and get their election certified properly. After federal investigation, once everything was resolved, everyone in that sheriff's department and everyone that was in that racketeering garbage that was going on ended up being in federal prison, and a new election was held for that region, and it all worked out. But that right there is a amazing example of many things. How quickly an entire branch can be corrupted. It is a huge testament to why we, the people, actually need to have military-grade weapons, because if our government goes tyrannical, we will need those weapons to overthrow our own government. I'm hoping it never gets to that point. But
sure doesn't look promising.
No, it doesn't. I'm hoping it never gets to that point, but the entire purpose of our Second Amendment is specifically for that. It is to repel foreign invasions and to repel tyranny from within. And that is exactly why when I hear people say, oh, what is your AR-15 going to do against the U.S. military with our tanks and missiles? Well, yeah, we should have those too. And then I'm suddenly a nut job.
Yeah, I want to play a piece of audio real quick. Let me find the video and I'll keep the volume. You can keep talking, but okay. I want to play this clip from Penn and Teller on the Second Amendment because
I love them. I haven't heard them in a while.
Let's see. Teller. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Second Amendment. All right. So I'm gonna play this. This isn't being recorded to go on radio. This is just a live stream, so a little language won't hurt anything. Hopefully, there's no stupid. Oh, there's.
The Second Amendment actually says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's it. Not a lot of words, just very specific ones.
It means that the states have the right to have a well-regulated militia. And a 20-year-old kid carrying an assault weapon on the streets of downtown America has absolutely nothing to do with a well-regulated militia.
Well, no. Read the words. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Sure, you need an organized military force to defend your country, but the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This is the people, in contrast with the militia. It doesn't say the right of the militia to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It says the right of the people. Now, why the word people? because the people who wrote this had just fought a war for 2 years against a tyrannical state militia. They knew the time might come when they'd have to do that again. So they made the possession of weapons a right that the militia could never take away. Now, gun control advocates say the phrasing is clumsy, and the comma separating the state from the people is just a pause to get your breath. Strange, they can't seem to point out any other places where those hack framers fucked up the wording.
Yeah.
I love that short video because it just it sums it all up nicely, because that is the thing with the Second Amendment. People just try to manipulate it and say,
Yep.
you know, and almost make it sound like it was for hunting. And it's like the framers were very specific.
Yeah.
And if it would have only been for hunting, they would have said it was only for hunting. It didn't say that. It mentions the militia and the people. The
Yep.
right to bear arms shall not be infringed. And just to go back a second, when we're talking about the Battle of Athens, Jesse, what do you think would happen today if that occurred right now? How badly would the media twist that to say that a bunch of armed and terrorist insurgents descended on a prison and took over the city government? We got it. This is why we need gun control. I would love to see how the media would manipulate
We've
a
actually already
situation like
seen
that.
that. We've seen that both in Michigan and in Washington State. In Washington State, they actually passed a law that nobody can protest on Capitol grounds carrying weapons.
Oh, that's right. You guys did. And yeah, then in Michigan, they showed up at the Capitol, Nit Whitmer, right?
Yep.
To get to supposedly kidnap Nit Whitmer. Like, nobody wants to kidnap her because they couldn't stand to be around her that long. Jesus, that woman.
But yeah, both in Michigan, you had exactly that. The media did exactly what you said. This is why we need gun control. This is why all these violent right-wing extremists showing up at the Capitol, threatening to do this and
Yeah.
threatening to do that. And yeah, I mean, look at Washington D.C. Look at what happened in January. You had the media do the same thing then. But when they burn down entire cities in protest for something else, that's not an issue.
No, that's the summer of love. That is mostly peaceful protesting. And that's the thing. They said mostly, which when they use that word mostly means that it wasn't completely peaceful. Therefore, people burn crap to the ground, and they broke the freaking law. Hey, Rick Combs just checked in. Rick, how we doing tonight, fella? Good to hear you. Good to see you. But yeah, the mostly peaceful protesters, mostly,
Yeah.
not completely, just mostly. Okay, well, that's fine. Let's say I break into a bank and I stole a bunch of money. Can I say, well, I mostly took my money and get away with it? Hell no. Still a federal crime to rob a bank. I'm going straight to jail. Do not pass go. Do not
There you
collect
go.
$200.
There you go. What if you go in, you check your bank account? Let's say you have exactly $10,000 in. You go into the bank, demand $10,000 and walk out. That's just your money, right?
Yeah. Right. I mean, can I go, listen, here's my bank statement. It says I have $10,003. I only took $10,000, which means I still left $3. So I only took what was mine,
Yeah.
Your Honor. And I would love to see the attorney's face when they go, what? What? Like, did you what? Like, listen, bro, I have $10,003. I went in demanding $10,000 in cash. Sure, I probably could have wrote out a withdrawal slip instead of using a gun, but I thought this will be a lot quicker. So to avoid any lines or anything like that, instead of filling out a thing where they click clack on the computer and they sit there and roll their eyes because they know they got to count out a large sum of money, I just said, listen, give me 10 grand. Here's the gun. If you don't give it to me, then things might go south. And then bingo, bango, boingo, I was out in 30 seconds instead of 5 minutes. What's the problem? I was doing like the speedy checkout line at Walmart. I had 10,000 or less, so I used the speed checkout line. I didn't go through the formal, normal thing. I just, I did the speedy checkout. I don't. And speaking of that, so in New York, several years ago, a guy walked in. He wasn't showing a gun. He had his hand in his pocket. He wrote a note, says, "I have a gun, and give me money." The teller goes, "Yeah, I don't believe you. I don't think you have a gun in your coat." And the guy ends up turning and burning and running out of the place. The teller jumps the counter, tackles him outside, holds him until the cops show up, and then the bank, what do? Yeah, they fire the guy.
Yeah, because that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
I've worked at places that said just give them whatever they want. It's not worth your life, and I'm like, yeah, but if I'm able to carry to my job, like I worked at a convenience store overnight. It had been robbed once before at night with a knife, mind you, but it's like if I could just conceal carry, if someone comes in and points a knife at me and says, "Give me the money," and I pull my gun and I go,
Get on the ground.
I think you might want to rethink your career choice here. You think the guy's like going to just chuck the knife at me? No, he's going to beat feet out of there.
Yeah.
But if you can, I get it. They think you could risk lives by, pulling a gun on the bank robber or doing whatever this guy did. But clearly he didn't have a gun. Clearly no money left the bank. He got to keep all the money. They didn't have to go, on a manhunt for a bank robber. And the guy saved a lot of hassle, and that's not the only example we have where an employee goes above and beyond. Somebody's robbing, somebody's doing something awful, and they intervene. They get the assailant down and hold him till the cops show up, and they end up getting my watch too. You need a new pair of shoes, brother? Here's a new pair of shoes. You want them too? You want my wallet? Here, that lady says she'll give you her purse. Hey, lady, give me your purse. Or do you want a guy who just jumps the counter and the one video example that I've seen that I don't think I'll ever forget. So this guy worked at this check cashing place, and before he opens, this guy comes in demanding money. He knocks this dude out, like literally punches him in the face, knocks him unconscious. And he calls the police and says, "Hey, this guy showed up." So basically what he did is he put money in the bag and then he held the bag towards himself. The guy had to reach out to grab the bag. And as he reached for the bag, the guy just reared back and boom, right in the chin, give him the old chin music, knocked him unconscious. He calls the police. When the guy comes to, he's got a wet rag because he bled on the floor, grabs him by the shirt and says, "Clean up your blood. The cops are coming." Makes him clean up his own blood off the floor. And I'm like, that's savage. And I freaking love it because that guy had it coming because he broke in and this dude, he was a big boy to begin with. But I mean, he hit him square in the jaw and that guy's eyes went up. But yeah, he's sitting there with a wet rag and he's like, "You clean up your blood right now." And I'm like, oh, what bigger insult than going in, trying to rob a place, getting knocked unconscious, bleeding on the floor, and then they tell you
clean up your
that you
blood.
Got to clean up your own blood.
Oh man, that's
awesome.
Great. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I was like, that's the kind of guy I want to hire.
Oh,
if I owned a gun store and I'm like, yeah, you want a job, bro? I'll pay you well to just stand behind a counter. I've seen your skills, sir. You are an inspiration. So somebody comes in, I just knock them out, and then if they bleed, you make them clean it up before the cops show up, and I'll pay you a bonus. If someone tries to legitimately is trying to rob the place, if you knock them out, make them bleed, and you can make them clean up their own blood before the cops show up, I will give you a $50 bonus. And as long as this guy's not off his rocker and decides to just go, "Oh, I think he's robbing a store," and just starts climbing the counter and punching random freaking customers, like, whoa. I said legitimate robbery.
Yeah, somebody
The good-
tries and just stuff a bag of chips in their pocket or something. Yeah, no.
Yeah, and he's like, "What are you doing?" Who blam? I'm like, whoa, dude. That's $2 bag of chips. That's a little unnecessary. Now,
Yeah.
you know, if he's trying to steal all the lottery tickets, you're talking about thousands upon thousands of dollars. All right, maybe then. But that was a bag of Doritos. There's no need for knocking people unconscious over a bag of Doritos. I mean, we've seen family members kill each other over chicken before, but I mean
That's chicken,
that must be a hell of a family like dinner.
right?
You get so angry at somebody for eating the last piece that you literally kill them. Either that chicken is, I guess you could say that chicken's literally to die for. Anyway, getting back on topic here, but it's just funny. There's instances of people who go above and beyond, and we can kind of carry this over what we're talking about now with law enforcement.
Yeah.
Some law enforcement goes above and beyond. They don't get the recognition that they deserve for actually a heroic deed. And then you have the instances that we've had, the Michael Browns and all these other
Yep.
things, and that stuff's just like shoved in your face nonstop,
Yep.
willy nilly, and you're just like, can I just?
And that right there is why we've gotten to the division that we're in right now. It's because they just shove one side in your face. And then there's those like little what a lot of people would see as minor instances where the officer just inconveniences you for a little while, which doesn't matter how little of an inconvenience it is, it needs to not happen. But you have the bad stuff being pushed with a regurgitated narrative over and over and over and over, and it just divides people into two sides. You're either for or against. And there's not that middle ground. Can't we just have accountability and be good with that? No, it's that division of you're either defund it all and get rid of it, or stand behind it unquestionably. Thin blue line, no exception. And there's very few people that I encounter that support the thin blue line that also support accountability, because they just assume that any kind of criticism of police is just anti-police rhetoric.
It's the same with certain people in the president. You're not supposed. I saw people during when Obama was in office saying you shouldn't criticize the president during a time of war, and I'm thinking, if you think that they're fighting for our freedom, and one of those is the First Amendment, then yes, I have every right to criticize the president if I think he's doing wrong.
And here you go. You look at Abraham Lincoln when we were fighting our Civil War. He had a terrible public approval early in the war because they were losing early in the war. People thought he was a terrible manager of the war. And if you have a president that is managing war poorly, then you have every reason to criticize that president for managing a war and the economy poorly while at war. In fact, I think that is all the much more reason to criticize a president is if we are at war, and that war either needs to stop or be handled better.
Yeah,
because we have our lives on the line in war. How is that something not to criticize over?
Right, and just to intervene in case anybody watches this later or whatever. If you want to read an interesting book and it delves into the Civil War, pick up Tom Wood's book called A Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, because he delves into Lincoln. He delves into Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee, their thoughts on slavery, because right now we have people that think that Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson were these racist slave owners, and they actually hated slavery. They weren't even for it. The reason they got into the war is because the way the North had treated the South. That's it.
Yeah.
And so
Robert
we're talking
E. Lee
about Lincoln.
Specifically. I love Robert E. Lee specifically. I wrote an article on him a long time ago. I'll probably link that into the description of this video later on. And I actually compared Robert E. Lee to Erwin Rommel, the German general of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Because Robert E. Lee was a very upstanding individual. He was against slavery. He even was against secession. He basically said, there's nothing that I see that can convince me that secession is a good idea. And he mentions how there's a war coming that's going to be absolutely catastrophic that I don't want to see. If I could take every slave under my wing and set them free, I would. His wife, who was the granddaughter of George Washington, taught blacks how to read, even though that was against the law to do. Robert E. Lee was a very, very good man. And in my article, when I compare him to Erwin Rommel, I note how Erwin Rommel was just so well respected by the people, by those under his command. He was a very honorable person. Even the allies who fought against him in World War II, especially Montgomery down in Africa when they were fighting in Egypt, had just so much respect for Erwin Rommel and they even nicknamed the battles in Libya and Egypt as a gentleman's war because Erwin Rommel was just such a respected individual. And when Erwin Rommel learned about the assassination plot on Hitler, he was torn because he knew Hitler was just terrible, but he still had his just undying loyalty to the country, and he was just so torn that he neither exposed it nor joined it because he just couldn't decide what to do. And I think even though Hitler obviously needed to go, especially in hindsight, I have to respect a man's loyalty and commitment to a nation, even though the nation was in the wrong for obvious reasons. I have to admire the loyalty that he showed in that, and the fact that Hitler, when he found out about Erwin Rommel knowing, he gave Erwin Rommel an ultimatum: basically commit suicide or we kill your family. And Erwin Rommel ended up committing suicide. And it's sad because I think Erwin Rommel was a brilliant man, a very intelligent man, and honestly just on the wrong side of history. I think if he was an Allied general, he would have been seen as basically the Patton of the West.
Yep.
And Patton was a kind of a hard-nosed asshole himself, but a great general, great mind. But he was rough on his soldiers from stories I've heard, but they had so much respect for him at the same time.
And speaking of world wars, I posted this on Facebook earlier, my personal page. There is a channel on YouTube, and it's just look up the Great War, Indy Neidell. That's Indy, and it's Neidell. He goes week by week, year by year of the First World War, and then he does side episodes on the assassination of the was it Archduke
yep.
Franz Ferdinand, the revolution in Russia, and some other things. But he goes into troop movements, what battles were taking place, and all these other things. And it's every week of every year from 1914 to 1918. It's a great thing. And it's the nice thing is the episodes are like 15, 20 minutes long. So it's not like you sit there and watch 2 hours an episode. He breaks it down nicely, gives you a nice clean overview of each week of the war. And he even does some side episodes of who did what in World War I. He had one on Adolf Hitler, just a short history on Hitler, what happened to him in World War I and what happened to him afterwards. So he's got one on, what was the wacky Russian guy? Oh, crap. Why can't they think? The mystic that the Tsar had. Rasputin.
Oh, yes, Rasputin. He was a character. Oh my
God. But he's got episodes on guys like Rasputin even. So if you haven't watched it and you like history, the history on World War I and World War II, I would definitely recommend sitting down and watching it because Indy Neidell does a great job. He reads a lot of different books. I mean, clearly he's an historian. And if you happen to like rock and roll, there's a band by the name of Sabaton, and all their songs are based on history. Their last album was called The Great War. They go into different historical figures from World War I, And Indy Nidell has joined with them to make their own history channel to give you the history behind some of their songs. And it is mind blowing what some of these people did. My favorite one is Night Witches from the Heroes album, and it talks about the Russian women, the night bombing women's brigade, the 388, 338. They got stuck with canvas wing biplanes and sometimes had sticky triggers, and the sticky triggers wouldn't, they would literally, one of them would have to climb out on the wing, release the bomb, and climb back into the cockpit. But they were instrumental in bombing the German front lines, and the Germans called them night witches because they would kind of slow their engines and go into a dive to come down and bomb them, and they said it sounded like the swish of a broom in the air, so they got the name, the nickname, the Night Witches. But Sabaton has all these cool songs, so you can look up Sabaton History Channel, and there's a long list of the songs they've done, and they team up, like, again, with Indy Nidell, and he gives you a 20-30 minute breakdown of the history behind the Night Witches, the guy from A Ghost in the Trenches, Pega Magabo. I can't think of the other guy's name from 82nd All the Way. That one's a great one too. But yeah, anybody that's interested in history, especially the history of different wars, look up Indy Nidell or Sabaton on YouTube, and you will literally have hundreds of hours of probably viewing of all these great. The music's great because it almost sounds like a rock opera, and then you have the backstory of the songs, and it's Sabaton's actually coming to St. Louis in September, and I think my wife and my daughter and I are all going to go see them because their stage show looks really cool. Like they have a song called "Attack of the Dead Men," and it's about the gas attacks, and they have this smoke creeping on the stage. The lead singer was
Welcome,
wearing one of the
everyone.
old style gas masks while he's singing and stuff. It looks really awesome, and so I'm
But
hoping to go
meanwhile,
see them.
ne-
And how in the hell do I keep getting off on these tangents, Jesse? We're going off on it, and then I start talking about rock and roll. I apologize.
You and I are the same way. I mean,
Oh.
I'm a lover of history too. There's like 3 channels I would so greatly recommend on that as well. There's Extra Credits on YouTube. There's Epic History TV. There's Oversimplified. It's kind of a cartoony way of doing it, but a lot of their stuff is phenomenal. And lastly, there's a guy called Vlogging Through History that does his original content and reactions to a lot of those, which is great.
Hey, if you would just to interrupt you real quick, if you want to in the comments below this, if you would post those
I will
later,
certainly do that.
whenever you get a chance, post those because I'll frickin' forget them. Somehow my ink pen has disappeared off my desk to write notes as we're doing this. But yeah, I'd like to check those out because there's nights I watch some TV before I go to bed because I can't sleep or whatever, and I just click on the Indy Nidell, but I'd love to watch some other stuff.
Yeah, I think you'd really enjoy, especially Vlogging Through History, because he does a lot of reaction videos to the videos that the others do. And he's a historian himself, and he'll do those reactions to those videos, add some information to it, just give some commentary to it, and it's phenomenal. He's probably my favorite historian that I've been watching because I've never really seen anything that he's said that I'm like, that's not right. Because there's oftentimes you'll get like the perspective from history that a lot of people will give. He has such an objective view on history and just the documentation of history that it's phenomenal. But yeah, I actually think this is probably a good time to wrap up our little live stream
Okay.
today.
Yeah, I was gonna cut it at 2 hours, but listen, dude. I went fishing this morning, and I was supposed to be out of my buddy's house at 7. For some reason, I woke up at 2:40 this morning, wide awake, and it took me over 2 hours to get back to sleep. And then I
hate
must
those
have
nights.
shut my alarm off when I didn't even remember shutting my alarm off. Woke up at 7. I woke up, opened my eyes, saw daylight, and went, "Oh boy. Looked at my phone, said 7:20, and I was like, damn it! And I hurried up, scrambled, texted my buddy, said I'll be there as soon as I can. Oh boy! And I luckily I'd put in everything in the car the night before, so it was ready to go. And I'm like, I can't believe I did this crap. And then I was scrambling to get dressed, and then it just rained on and off the whole time. I had a chill on me when we come off that. It was still fun. I haven't fished in over a year. It was great, but yeah, I had just woken up from a nap. I came home. I'm like, I'm taking a nap, and I just woken up and seen a message from you, and I'm like, well, I guess I can try to do this, but hopefully I don't sit here and yawn the whole time and look like a zombie because I'm still halfway sleepy. But once I got talking, it kind of perked me up. But yeah, I didn't think I was going to be worth a hoot for this video, but you've been gracious enough to like have me on. I've had you on, and I was like, hell, I haven't talked to Jesse it's been a couple months really since I talked to you, and I thought I need to do this because I haven't been able to catch up with you and do all those things. So I appreciate you actually asking me to do this because the Sheriff David Hathaway interview was so enlightening, and it was uplifting to know that even though we had a lot of law enforcement across the country who said, they were just kind of lax, like we're not worried about enforcing these mandates. We had a lot of cops in the debates and then beats the second place person by 4 times the amount of votes.
Right.
That's very uplifting and very it's inspirational to say that yes, you can tell the truth, you can be honest with people when running for office, and you can get elected. And clearly he's a well-educated, well-read on the Constitution and the economical side of things. He's just a very educated person, but he's intelligent. He's in law enforcement, but he still understands that people have constitutional rights, and he obeys the Constitution, the most important thing a law enforcement officer is supposed to do. So listen, I heard him on Tom Woods. I'll be completely honest. I heard him on Tom Woods. My wife and I were driving home listening to it, and she's like, you need to get in contact with him and get him on. And I was like, I don't think this guy just did Tom Woods, and Tom Woods is like the epitome of libertarianism, intelligent libertarian, not the wacky side of it. And he's intelligent. And this guy was on with Tom Woods. I'm some lowbie freaking podcaster, and I'm thinking he's not going to agree to it. Well, apparently he did because he listened. I know what he did, and I appreciate that he listened to my interview with Rick Combs, probably to find out what I was about. And I'm like, this guy even does his freaking research before he comes on. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so I was very humbled that he's like, yeah, dude, I'm down with it. And I'm thinking, you are? This is freaking amazing. And talking to him is just like so. It was such a joy to hear again that we have a law enforcement official kick the shit out of his opponents and win the election and do the things he said he was going to do.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. It's just, it's one of those interviews that I'm going to probably remember as long as I do this. And I need to actually go back and listen to it because, I did it, but sometimes I go back and listen to these things because I'm busy.
You haven't digested it yet.
Right. And I'm busy trying to frame my next question or next comment so we can continue the dialogue, and I might miss little juicy tidbits there. So I need to go back and listen to it again.
Yeah, it was phenomenal.
This has been a great week for me. I mean, this is my 3rd interview this week, and well, you're not an interview. You're just a friggin' freedom-loving brother that comes on when you want to, and I wholeheartedly appreciate that. 'Cause you teach me a lot of stuff, but this has been a busy week for my podcast, and I actually kind of like it because it keeps me out of trouble.
Yep, I know that feeling. I'm trying to get myself a little more active on everything again myself because I've been trying to find new work lately, and I think I finally found something so I can get a little more back into everything. But yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say in closing is 2 things actually. One being the CGM recently endorsed a new candidate here in Washington State for the U.S. House District 6. His name is Aaron Hansen. I don't have the information to pull up on the stream at the moment, but please, anyone from Washington State, check him out. Anyone out of state, be willing to check him out. Donate. Anything helps. We need to get constitutional-minded people in office. The next thing I'll say, though, is we do need to start focusing heavily at the local level. We have to get sheriffs like Hathaway. We have to get chiefs of police like him, mayors like him. We need people that will actually hold others accountable and stand by the Constitution. Because I will say this, and Robert Smith, when you had him on earlier this week, he mentioned how he wants to run for state house. He said it spot on. Originally, he thought he wanted to get the federal government to leave the states alone, but I think he's realized that he needs to get the states to kick the federal government out.
Yep.
And that being said, if we cannot hold our own state accountable, there's no way we're going to hold the federal government accountable, because there's 50 states that are a part of the federal government. There's no way we're going to hold the federal government accountable if we cannot hold our state and localities accountable. So we have
Absolutely.
to start focusing at that local level. We have to support sheriffs like Hathaway and other liberty-minded people at that local level. And it doesn't matter what party they are from. We have to stop that party line voting. We have to vote for the Libertarian if he's constitutional, the Independent if he's constitutional, or the Republican if he's constitutional. But we have to do that vetting. We have to back the constitutional-minded person and work at that local level and build ourselves up. We drifted away from the Constitution with a long game. They started local. They took over the local areas. They started building up in the big cities. Then they started taking over California, Washington, New York, and all of these big areas. And eventually they infiltrated the federal government. And then we had FDR and Woodrow Wilson, two of the worst presidents, in my opinion, with regards to the Constitution, absolutely destroy our Constitution. And it's been a fight ever since to restore it. We have to use that same tactic against them. We have to take over that local level. We have to win that the localities back, and then from the state level, we can just tell the federal government no.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Jesse, thanks so much again for joining me, brother. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you inviting me on to do this. Again, at some point, I've moved to a different job position, and I'm not so freaking tired when I get home. So if you get a schedule and you're comfortable in it and you want to try to do a monthly live stream or every other week live stream, just let me know, because like I said, I'm not near as blasted tired when I get home from work at night. So if you get something figured out, you got a schedule you'd like to work out where we can live stream and cuss and discuss things, let me know when you settle in, and we'll try that again, because I'm not in the crap situation I had been in.
Yeah, and I just remembered one more thing. I will be filing for office for a county utility position on Monday.
Awesome.
So it's not going to be any like legislative position, but it will be a money handling position. So I'll be able to say we don't have the money and not spend the money. I'm not going to spend money that we don't have.
Fantastic.
And it's still a stepping stone. Nothing else was open at this time to run for, so that's what I'm going to do.
Awesome. Well, good luck in that venture, sir. And we'll chat at you later, brother. I appreciate your time.
Yep. Have a good one.
Take care, brother.